And it became Little Old Lady from Pasadena.
Oh, that was it, yeah. They switched it up a little bit.
Big fat from North Dakota.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's time for Rock and Roll, the podcast, with Dr. Nick Redbone, Tom Nelson, and me. Today's podcast brought to you in part by
Pumpkin spice mac and cheese, because even giant food conglomerates need to jump the shark every once in a while.
The pumpkin spice has returned in a great way.
It is
It's
absolutely
everywhere.
Would you try pumpkin spice mac and cheese?
No.
I don't
I
think
would try
so.
pretty much any mac and cheese you put in front of me.
Yeah.
At least once. There's a new one from the Cheetos folks that's like a jalapeno.
Ooh.
Mac and cheese. Looks very good. Haven't made it yet, but it looks real nice.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
Sounds super nice. Hey, welcome to episode 10. It's episode 10 of Rock and Roll the Podcast. I am Dr. Nick. That is Tom Nelson. That's Brock Johnson.
Hello.
He's a big silly guy from North Dakota.
No, it was a big fat effer. North Dakota.
Well, I'm just, I was changing it up to make it more family friendly. Because we only swear sometimes
And
on
have
this
we
podcast.
ever been family friendly? When has that ever happened?
Marginally.
Very marginally.
This episode, we might change some of that because we're going to talk about
The punk rock.
punk rock, man. Punk rock, not only a genre of music, but punk is one of the most powerful cultural. I mean, look, rock and roll changed everything in the 60s and in the 50s. Punk did it again.
Yeah.
It's, you know what I mean? It had, at least in my mind and some of the studying that I've done, and I'm by no means an expert, punk rock was like rock and roll again. You know what it was like? It was
Squared.
Yeah. Rock and roll grew into this thing, and it grew big, and it needed a kick in the ass again, and here came punk.
And they set it on fire.
And they set the whole
sure
thing
did.
on fire.
And then they burned down their venue just for the hell of it. And then went
Exactly.
outside and set fire to the cars as well.
So when you guys think about...
That's a good analogy, man.
When you think about punk rock, what is the first band that comes to mind for you?
Ramones.
Ramones?
Yeah.
Okay, for me, Ramones or Sex Pistols.
Sex Pistols, yeah.
And I did a little bit of research, and it looks like that's kind of where it started. It was the Ramones in New York, and it was the Sex Pistols in England, along with The Damned.
Right.
The Clash happened as well. And I'm trying to think of who else would have. I guess maybe New York Dolls were. Were they more glam though? They were kind of punky.
Well, that's
You'd
just
know
it.
more New York Dolls than I would.
That's the thing. There's so many subgenres of this too.
Yeah.
But I also think of who thinks of Patti Smith?
Oh,
as
for
being,
sure.
But she is, kind
Absolutely.
of the punk poet.
Yeah,
going
for sure.
back to the early beginnings of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. So this and once again, I did some research. I did homework.
Nice job.
I bet my teacher
You get a star.
I'm a big kid. Hey, let's take a time out for YouTube. Okay, right, we're back.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to apologize for the tardiness of the last two episodes. You left me. You left me, and he had an excuse. You didn't have any goddamn excuse.
I had a vacation. That's kind of an excuse.
Sure, whatever.
I had to go grocery shopping in Colorado, man. Hey.
And there goes the family-friendly aspect of the show.
It's family friendly anywhere but here. Okay, sorry. Our home isn't Idaho. Our home is the internet.
Yes.
That's right.
So there we go. Okay, but anyway, yeah. Punk rock is kind of, I did my homework on Wikipedia, and they defined punk rock as not only, the musical style, but it's also kind of, it's a DIY
It's
thing.
a full-up lifestyle.
It's a philosophy
It is.
almost.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit here of the three of us? Two of us have been in rock bands and we're rock musicians. You did more time, Brock. I'm pointing at Brock because if you can't see, I'm pointing at Brock now forcefully with my right hand and my index finger, and I'm saying you, Mister, were in several punk bands.
Oh, lots of them.
Okay,
yeah.
I played in one for just a minute, and I remember the experience I had, and then I want to get to yours. It was very much DIY. I was playing a borrowed bass through almost an amplifier. The drums were kind of taped together.
Yeah.
I remember playing, and I kind of was like, I approached it as, do you guys want me to, do you want me to write a bass line? Or no, just play with the guitar player's plan. Okay, fair enough. and trying to keep up with him. He's playing so fast that I had to tape my thumb because I was wearing a damn hole in the knuckle brushing against that string. Playing with a pick faster than I'd play a Megadeth tune.
Yeah.
So, but it was very much, it wasn't about, and that's what they tried to teach me. And back then I didn't get it. I understand now. It wasn't about what I was playing. It was how you play it.
And your attitude while playing it.
Right. Can you speak to that somewhat, Brock?
Well, I can tell you how I fell into it.
Okay.
I was an outcast in school.
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, weird, huh? And I was fine with that, but I couldn't really find my place.
Right.
And eventually you meet other outcasts, and we kind of fall into this thing. We're like, oh, wait a second. And the first big show that I went to was Blink-182 and Phoenix TX and Silverchair, which Silverchair didn't
weird
fit the
fit.
bill. But this was in Blink-182's early days. It was when they first started making all the headlines, and it was at the Roy Wilkins Auditorium in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay.
And when I went to this show, all of a sudden I see 2,000 me's. I'm like, oh my God, this is
my
where I
people.
belong.
Now, and I think that's a great point to make. It did become, your music kind of becomes the flag of your tribe. When you're a young guy, especially, a young lady too, but I mean, rock music is, and let us be honest, a mostly a guy thing.
There were a lot of chicks at the punk rock show.
Really?
Yeah.
Man, I played in the wrong kind of band. The band I was in for the last 15 years, all we got was music nerds and their dads.
Yeah.
About 11 of them every show. But anyway, but it was, you saw a room full of outcasts and you thought, I want...
This is where I belong, because you were always trying to fit in. You're always trying to be a part of whatever, there is to be a part of out there, and I just couldn't find that in my high school. I went to a small town. There was no... So when I got back home, I had been playing drums in the marching band, and there were a couple of my other nerd friends who had picked up a guitar and a bass. And,
okay, there you go.
We decided that this was going to be our thing, and we got together, and when the first time I joined a band, I didn't have a drum set.
Okay.
But it didn't matter, because I jacked a cymbal from the high school band room, not forever. I eventually returned it. And found
Sure you did.
But, hey, man, it's I don't know what the statute of limitations is on stealing crap from high school. And there was a bucket, and then I can't remember, there was something else that we were using as like a makeshift bass drum. And so...
how did it sound, dude? I mean, really?
Well, I mean, to us it
worked,
sounded
right?
great because it worked.
It works.
I mean, you don't need a lot with punk rock.
And that touches on where punk came from. Let's talk a little bit more about what the rock world looked like when punk kind of exploded in 76, 77. Looking back on 70s, and we have a full-blown expert on the 70s rock scene. No, we're looking at you, Tom.
Oh, hi.
Yeah. Hey there. The 70s, mid-70s, late 70s, rock was about as big and bloated and excessive as it had ever been.
Just mainstream.
Mainstream, and the prog bands were, 15-minute organ solos and costumes, and we got, what's his name from Yes doing a musical on ice. You know what I mean? They had taken it so far, it wasn't
very
rock.
Self-indulgent.
Very self-indulgent, and laser shows and scream. It wasn't rock and roll anymore, at least to a certain subset.
Exactly. They became caricatures of themselves to a certain degree.
Right.
Yeah, then punk came along, based out of 60s garage bands.
Exactly.
Where it started. And they were just like, screw this, man.
Yeah.
This isn't rock and roll was originally supposed to be about, and it was about rebellion and going against authority. Then they got lazy.
Yeah.
In the 70s, and then here comes punk.
And they said we don't want your flashy stage costumes. We don't want your laser light shows. We don't want the hippies and the rainbows. We
don't want you with your good time buddies.
You and your good time buddies and your Showco light grid. They wanted rude T-shirts, leather jackets, screwed up haircuts, a DIY guitar and amp, whatever you could scrape together.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up, because when you and I first, we had known each other well before you came to work at The Edge, but then when you came to work at The Edge, we got to know each other and got to be really good friends. And you would tell me stories about going out with your band on how you thought it was bullshit that bands would go out without putting themselves together.
Yes.
You wanted to look nice when you got up on stage. that was a concept that I didn't understand, because in punk rock, you just show up.
Right. You played in what you sound checked
like
in.
It's almost like you go to extra lengths to not dress up.
Right. And that was one of my, for me, that's been one of my counters to the punk thing. Well, okay, so you're rugged individualists now, but now you all look the same again. You know what I mean? But right. But that besides the point, I do see that it was an absolute knee-jerk reaction to these guys dressing up like parade floats. Yeah. And look, man, punk exploded, not only musically, and it had to explode culturally, because musically, let's be real, how great were the Sex Pistols as far as players?
Oh, but that's not what it was about. You still loved their songs. You still loved their attitude. You still wanted to go to their show. I've never been to a Sex Pistols show, disclaimer, but I mean, that whole world, it's 3 chords and a 3-piece drum set, and away you go.
Yeah, 3 chords and a lot of attitude.
Yeah.
Attitude being the key word, I think.
Yeah.
That's really what it was all about. The music was, sure, you bet. That was part of the vehicle for delivering this attitude, this anti-establishment, anti-authority.
Yeah,
screw you stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I just flipped. Let's show the finger here.
Oh, you know what?
If you're not watching,
we're going to take another break for our YouTube channel right now, and we're going to give you the bird. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share it with a friend. Share it with an enemy, but friend it with somebody. Share it with somebody. We love you, YouTube. Right, Brock?
Love them.
Anyway, so the punk it explodes in England, and never mind the Bollocks and God Save the Queen. So disrespectful at that time. If you look at where the Sex Pistols exploded from, and putting the Queen on the cover of your album with a pin through her nose, man, you didn't do that. You still almost don't do that in England today. I mean, it's not a governmental thing against it, but it's just seen as so openly disrespectful.
Yep.
And Johnny Rotten was the king of disrespectful. He still is. You know, if he thinks you like it, he hates it.
He's still a little bitch.
Oh, he
absolutely. And that's what makes Johnny Rotten awesome.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. And meanwhile, in New York, for me, I've been in a band that played a Ramones tune or two. Full disclosure, I am not a fan of punk rock. I love the Ramones. The Ramones, not related, but they all had the last name Ramone. They all dressed in black leather jackets with black hair and black jeans, and they played lightning fast, and they'd play 2 chords, 3 if you were lucky, and they'd have songs like Beat on the Brat. A song that went Beat on the Brat with a baseball bat.
Beat on the Brat with a baseball bat. Oh yeah. That's it. That's the song.
What can you do? Ooh,
right.
With the brat. Yeah. And it had, in my mind, where the Sex Pistols were just raw, razor sharp, finger in the air. There's still a lot of New York and still a lot of American rock and roll, greaser rock and roll almost, you know what I mean, in the Ramones sound. Do you get that too?
Sure, yeah. And as far as, being punk, they were more accessible as opposed to being, too far out there, because, they were the leather and they did have musically, I think that they were more not quite as crazy,
not as so maybe a little bit more melodic.
So for the on American shores in the mid '70s, that would be your entry, that'd be your gateway into punk. Would be usually the Ramones. You'd have to say, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
and when I first got into punk rock, because I'm 36, and so when I subscribed to the punk
it's okay,
rock,
Tommy.
Yeah, you guys are old. It's great.
I'm wearing underwear right now that's 36 years old.
So
or
I smell.
Am I?
Oh God!
It was the early '90s. It was No Effects, and it was Bad Religion, and it was Anti-Flag, and so these are the bands that I fell in love with. And you start reading about where they came from, and then you go backwards, and everything that I fell in love with went back to the Ramones.
Right.
And nothing against the Sex Pistols, but that's where all of the stuff that I fell in love with kind of went back to. It all came from the Ramones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at sort of family trees of punk rock, they do tend to sprout from there. I mean, the English scene, sure, the Damned came from the Sex Pistols vibe. The Clash were, I think, more advanced as a band.
Yeah, I don't know that I would even classify the Clash as punk rock.
They're
in that world, but
could you classify the attitude of the Clash as
yes,
punk?
Without question.
Without necessarily.
Would you call them pop punk then? Not necessarily pop, but what would you, if you had to classify them other than punk, what would it be, Brock? I mean, because there are so many subgenres. I mean, really.
Sure. Could they have been the first pop punk band?
They had some hits.
Rock the Casbah, pretty poppy.
Yeah.
Kind of a crossover.
Train in Vain.
I think there's a lot of people who give Green Day credit for turning punk rock into what it became in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And because, I mean, Green Day happened, and then you had your Blink-182s, and then you had your Good Charlottes, and then you had,
The Offspring.
The Offspring. Yeah, the Offspring, I think, was actually, were they before or after Green Day? I think they were about the same.
I think they're a little bit before before Green Day a little bit. I think Green Day just took that format and they made it a 10. They polished
brought
the
it
gem.
to Woodstock.
Exactly.
There it went. But as far as classifying the Clash, I don't know, because I mean they're not like a straight up rock band like an AC/DC or something, but they're not quite punk rock either.
A little bit more melodic and a little bit a bit more craftsmanship put into their music, but
still trying to own a little bit of that attitude,
of that angsty attitude. Yeah. So it would be one thing if the punk rock story ended with the explosion of the 70s, but it didn't. That's the thing. This is where I get fascinated by punk rock, because that raw form, wasn't a huge fan of it. Still not a huge fan of it outside of a Ramones tune or two. But what it turned into, because while rock was kind of taking a back seat, even the big bands, the Stones and Zeppelin in the late 70s, they kind of took a step back. I mean, they were still working, but the other bands were getting the attention, these young punk bands. And then when it looked like maybe punk was starting to fizzle out and disco was happening at the same time, those two genres got together and had the weirdest baby. And it's called New Wave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how much great music came out of New Wave. They took the sounds of, they took the keyboards, they took the electric pianos, they changed the drum beat. It's still a 4/4 beat, but now they're changing where the emphasis is, so it's a little bit more danceable. Mm-hmm. The fashion stayed kind of edgy. The haircuts got better.
Well, not everyone can pull off a planter on your head either, like Devo.
How punk rock is Devo?
They're punk rock.
Devo stands for de-evolution. They wanted to take rock and roll and strip it down to zeros and ones.
And that they did.
And they did.
Yeah.
It's almost became a parody. Devo started off as a parody of themselves. Mm-hmm. It's so brilliant. But you look at Debbie Harry and Blondie.
Yeah.
Maybe my favorite, because Debbie Harry still to this day is punk rock all day long.
Absolutely.
But she was this glamorous disco queen at the same time. New Wave doesn't happen without punk.
Yeah.
Period.
No.
And then that New Wave thing even turns into the New Romantic movement in the 80s in England. You get the Duran Durans and the Depeche Modes and the what am I thinking of? Friday I'm in Love.
The Cure. The Cure.
Yeah.
The Cure even has some of that. Mm-hmm. So punk rock doesn't ever die. It's like cockroaches. You stomp on it, you think you got it, and it just crawls underneath the counter and becomes something new.
As it should, man, because it's so anti-authoritarian, in your face.
Yeah.
It's gotta live.
It has to live. You can't kill it. And it continued to evolve through the 80s. You mentioned some of the bands. One in particular, Bad Religion, has just been around forever and ever and ever.
And they're still doing stuff.
Social Distortion is another band that just never really went away. Started off as punks, have stayed on the road. And those are the bands that spawned they were the bands that influenced the bands that you talked about earlier. Let's talk about that, the 90s pop punk explosion. I don't know anybody on the planet that knows more about it than Brock Johnson.
I'm a pop punk junkie.
Let's get this out there. I don't know if anybody knows this. Brock Johnson trivia. Brock Johnson was once the webmaster
for the Green Day
website. That truth right there. Now you're like a punk rock mecca. Punk fans will come from all over the world just to touch you.
There's that. Yeah. Please, no touching.
Please don't touch. Don't touch.
Come on.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Where would you say pop punk exploded first? Where was the point of origin for pop punk?
I go to Green Day.
Okay.
And I, like you said, I mean, there's a couple of bands that had been doing it earlier, but Green Day is really the band, and they took so much shit for it.
Right.
Because they were Sweet Children in 1989.
Okay.
They became Green Day in, I think it was late 90 or early 91. They'd put out a couple of records, and then and they were on Lookout Records, which was a fantastic. And Lookout is now defunct, and it just went defunct.
Was it a punk label?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
Straight up punk rock. Yeah, Operation Ivy and the Lookouts is the band that originated it, and I cannot remember the guy's name to say. Lawrence Livermore.
Okay.
He was in the Lookouts. It was his band, and that's kind of where Lookout Records came from. And then he started signing these bands and gave them a chance to get into punk rock. And so then Warner Brothers starts paying attention to what Green Day's doing when they had Kerplunk, which was their album in 92.
And that's just prior to Dookie.
Dookie was 94.
Okay.
And so Warner Brothers gives them a deal, and Green Day was used to playing like Gilman Street, which was a venue, and still is a venue that is just for unsigned indie bands. I mean, that's who's supposed to be playing Gilman, is the bands who are underground.
Right.
And they took so much crap from their fan base when everybody found out that they signed to Warner Brothers. But it didn't stop them. And when they released Dookie, the world exploded and was like, this is the new thing.
And it was everywhere.
Oh,
man.
yeah.
That record
Couldn't
was,
escape it.
Yeah.
Radio was playing the hell out of it. It was on. They toured the hell out of that record.
Yep.
That's the one that almost. That was the first time Billy Joe tried to kill himself. Was his pure.
That was Insomniac.
Oh, was it?
Because they rushed to 1995's Insomniac because the label wanted another record, and he had just had a baby, and they were jacked up on amphetamines. That's what
He had a baby?
Geek Stink. Yeah, weird, huh? No,
This guy's phenomenal, man.
What can he do?
if you want to go way back, I can tell you where he found his wife, but that's a story for another day. In 95, they released Insomniac, and the label had them on the road nonstop.
Okay.
And he had just had a baby with his wife.
Just checking,
and
man.
was trying to be a rock star and trying to be a dad and trying to be and he said, I can't do it. And
Okay.
so they canceled that whole tour.
Okay.
Then Nimrod happened, and then he got fat, and everybody kind of thought, okay, well, finally he's he's found what he needed to find.
Yeah, he got fat and happy.
Not to get off on Green Day, it happens.
Yeah.
But I think with Dookie, that really started the movement, because then you saw an opportunity for Blink-182, who did the same thing. I mean, they had two albums that nobody had heard of. Well, I mean, the punk rockers had heard of it.
Right, but it wasn't. But mainstream, it hadn't happened.
Right, and now all of a sudden, I think it was MCA was like, oh, hey, well, we can have our own Green Day. And
Right.
so they signed Blink-182, and they pair them up with these incredible producers who have crafted this genre. I mean, you can hear the work of Rob Cavallo in every Green Day record. I think there was one that he wasn't on, and then Blink-182. Finn. I can't remember the guy's name, but there's about 5 or 6 of them in that world.
I think it would be great if his name was Finn.
Or Huckleberry.
Or Huckleberry.
His parents, they just weren't very creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But John Feldman from Goldfinger, he was responsible for so much pop punk.
Okay.
He made Good Charlotte. He was the Goldfinger guy.
Okay.
He did Lost Prophets. He did some stuff with The Used. He did... God, there's just so many bands that he created.
And punk, while this was happening, while pop punk was happening, it's not to say that punk went silent, between the early 80s and the late 80s or the early 90s, because punk, now we can talk about what I do know. If there's no punk, there's no Motorhead. If there's no Motorhead and punk, there's no Metallica, which means there's no thrash metal. That Bay Area thrash thing. First of all, the big four, the Slayers, Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, and Anthrax. None of that happens without punk rock. Anthrax, 2 of those guys were way plugged into the New York hardcore punk scene anyway. You can look at early Metallica performances going up in T-shirts and ripped jeans, and that's... While LA metal is happening with the huge hair and the spandex, Metallica went up with bullet belts and T-shirts and played as fast and as dangerously as they could with a little bit of talent, but not much more than the Ramones when they first started.
Yeah.
And so it never went away. And then in the early 90s, it exploded again. This time, instead of being New York or LA, this time, instead of being London, it was these sleepy little working towns in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And this time, they called it grunge.
Yeah.
And you can't say for 1 second that grunge rock wasn't absolutely DIY metal with too much caffeine, too much depression, too much heroin. And it became a thing. Nirvana is pure punk.
Sure, absolutely. You can't argue that.
Yeah. So it doesn't really ever go away. And now I have to look, man. After 25 years of playing hard rock and metal in bands, always being the guy that was pissed that I was losing to gigs to punk bands, I get it.
Yeah,
I do. I understand it. I get it. I'm not crazy about it, but to not understand why and how it became such a powerful cultural influence. Because let's talk about what it does. Not just let's take music out of it. Let's look at what the internet startups are punk rock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? These are Apple. He built the first computer. Steve Jobs built that first Apple computer in his garage. That's punk rock.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that goes everywhere. I think punk rock, it is DIY punk rock, or is punk rock DIY? You know what I mean?
And I give your daughter a lot of credit for opening your eyes. Because she's a punk rocker.
Yeah, my youngest is very much. She has her mohawk.
Yep.
Her nose is pierced. She walks around in her jean jacket that she's got the pins through and all of the logos and all the. She loves Dead Kennedys. She loves Black Flag. Dead Kennedys, and Jello Biafra. Another one of those guys that just he saw American politics. He loved to take shots at American politics and threw his middle finger up at him. This guy, if I told it to his face, and it's good he's dead, but if I said it to him, I would hope he would understand how I said it. Frank Zappa, the composer of composers and this genius that wrote music that humans couldn't play, punk rock. He did it out of his garage. He'd hate that. He would hate me to say that. Yeah. But it was the attitude. Is punk music or is punk attitude?
I would say it's both, but it's more attitude. It starts with the attitude, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. I think I would have to agree. Yeah. The Rolling Stones were almost punk in their attitude. Mm-hmm. You don't see punks playing old Freddie King songs,
right?
But you do still see them kind of raising their finger, wearing their sunglasses during interviews, walking out halfway through. That's a Keith Richards move, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think punk rock in the world of rock and roll, punk rock is needed to keep the evolution going. Because I think without that swift kick in the ass, rock and roll will sit on its laurels, and the labels, at least back in the day when the labels mattered, they sure as hell weren't going to rush for a change because they were making money on 3 or 4 generations of the last big thing that happened.
Yeah.
It's like the mushrooms that grow out of the corpse.
There you go.
Wow.
Ooh, there you go.
Am I wrong?
Nope. It's absolutely correct.
That's a great analogy.
and then it rises up and becomes something great until punk has to come along and kick that thing's ass because it started to get too big for its
I was going to try and work in like a Phoenix thing, but the mushrooms and the corpse was better.
and gross.
Well, pretty gross.
That was a YouTube break once again. Remember to check this out on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Share with a friend. Hit the bell for notifications. See, look, I know all the YouTube speak.
Wow, you're really
all
good
the
at
YouTube
that.
speak. Now, punk rock today, what's happening?
You still have bands who are able to get in front of a mainstream audience and do it. You've got Rise Against.
Absolutely.
Great example. I mean, those guys have been punk rock forever.
Yep.
And every once in a while, they'll have one that sneaks into a mainstream rock chart.
Yeah, it just never seems to quite go away. I don't know.
Avenged Sevenfold.
Avenged Sevenfold, very much. They're super technical, but they started.
But it's punk rock.
If you listen, especially the vocals, he's a punk singer. I guess what I'm saying is, in my mind, punk rock can be almost anything. Punk itself is not defined by the music it's attached to, or even the fashion it's attached to. I can even, I'm a jazz cat, and I can even say I would say Jaco Pastorius, great electric jazz player. Punk rock. Because he broke down the role that was put in front of him. He said, nope, I can do more. I can do it different. I can do it better, and I can do it my way. And he proved it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, punk can kind of apply to almost anything, really. As far as rock and roll goes, yeah, rock and roll is a huge cultural force, but punk rock's the gasoline that makes it go, and it's always been there. Yeah. Jerry Lee Lewis was punk rock. Not only am I going to bang away on this piano, I'm going to marry my 13-year-old cousin.
Right?
It's gross and it's weird, and it made you uncomfortable.
Boy.
But it's punk.
But it never went away. Yeah. It's also, I believe, against the law.
Well, and you also have bands that were doing it back in the day that are still doing it today. And we've talked about a couple of them. Bad Religion.
For sure.
And No Effects. No Effects, Fat Mike owns Fat Records, and he's given so many punk bands opportunities.
Right.
Because that's what he's done with his money. He created a record label so that he could give more bands a chance to make it and record punk rock and play shows for a living.
The punk band that I found myself playing bass for just a minute, we were sharing a rehearsal space with them, my band, and we were playing sort of more, at that time it was like Faith No More-ish, kind of pushing the envelope, getting weird, but we were all friends, so we shared this rehearsal space. And I remember walking in one day, they had finished their practice. We walked in and they had taken beer cans and styrofoam and duct taped it all together to put up against the doors for soundproofing.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do, man.
Rock.
It's so punk rock.
Yeah.
Did it work? No. Was it a cool mess? Absolutely.
I don't know why they would have tried styrofoam and cans. Like I've seen the floor mat thing work, where you just go get some cheap floor mats. Like you can buy the car floor mats or the bathroom mats are the best because those are cheap. And hang those up on the wall as kind of carpet.
Yeah, and I can tell you why. Because they had stolen a bunch of styrofoam and we drank a lot of beer. Two great flavors coming together. It was like a Reese's peanut butter cup of stupid.
Sure.
But it was sure fun.
Why would you ever think the aluminum? Okay.
I blame it on them. It was probably us too. So really, that punk rock rebellion, that punk rock vibe was there in the very beginning. I mean, Elvis Presley, there was some punk rock there. There was some punk rock in taking the norm and playing it faster and playing it hotter and shaking your hips on TV when you weren't supposed to and you know what I mean? Punk rock, they call it punk, but it's always been rebellion.
Yep. Going against the grain, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so is there... God, I can't believe I'm doing this. I've taken my entire stance on punk rock for the last nearly 30 years, and I'm talking myself out of it.
Good.
Does rock and roll exist without the punk rock attitude? I say no.
No, I don't know. I think the rock and roll attitude, came before punk rock.
Okay.
I think that was something that maybe punk rock adopted.
Or was it renamed?
Well, I think that the rock and roll attitude was there first, but as you pointed out, it's the punk rock that just kind of keeps it real or keeps it, sustains it.
Yeah, sure, sustains it. It's the fuel.
Otherwise, rock would just kind of like, who knows, it turned into like Percy Faith as an orchestra.
Right.
You got to have that punk,
that spark,
that element to regenerate it.
It's the danger. It's the fire. Yeah. It's the I'm going to go to a rock show tonight and I might either get laid or I might get punched in the face, but that's it's the danger in rock and roll.
Kenny Loggins just started playing in my head.
The least punk rock person in the world.
You're correct.
Absolutely. On one side, you have punk rock. On the other side, you have Kenny Loggins. On one side, you have the Sex Pistols. On the other side, you have Danger Zone.
Yeah. That was the song.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So really, they can call it punk rock all they want, but it's always just been rock and roll, hasn't it? The purest, in that pure essence of what makes rock and roll what it is.
I think so.
Punk rock just quantified it, but it was always there. They just found the
just
pure
put it under a microscope.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it
and purified it and used it. And used they stripped away the filler and just got the straight octane that makes the fire and makes the thing go. Mm-hmm. I can't believe I've talked myself into respecting punk.
Congratulations.
There you go.
Thank you.
Proud of you.
I think. As this, you know what? This is almost like a Dr. Phil episode. All of a sudden, we've had an intervention. Did you guys plan this?
Now, tell me again about what you've learned today.
It's not my baby.
Whatever, I do what I want.
Friends, that was Rock and Roll, the podcast. If you have a topic that you would like for us to talk about on this show, please, by all means, fire us a note. We have an email address, right?
That's correct. You can email. rock and roll the podcast at gmail.com.
You can also drop a note to us through YouTube, through Facebook. You can get a hold of any of us on Facebook. Dr. Nick Redbone. Look for me on Facebook. You'll find me there.
Facebook.com/Radio Brock.
And
TomNelson.85.
Okay. On Facebook.
On Facebook.
Okay. So by all means, find us, drop us a note. And like I've said, we want to grow this podcast because it's something we all love. We hope you dig it too. And what's cooler than rock and roll, as we have covered? Absolutely nothing. So tell a friend, tell an enemy, but tell somebody. Did I say an enemy? Tell an enemy?
Now, I think you're dealing with some internal problems that we could discuss in another episode.
Here's what I think. Now we're going to have an argument between two Dr. Phils. Except I sound like the counselor from South Park. Okay.
Mr. Mackey is Dr. Phil.
He really is.
Yeah.
And so on that note, check us out on Facebook. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Spotify, Podbean, wherever you can get a hot, tasty podcast, you will find us. Until the next time, my name is Dr. Nick Redbone. That is Brock Johnson. That is Tom Nelson. Peace, love, and rock and roll. We are out of here.